quorums.
Mm-hmm.
One minute to go. Welcome, everybody, to the Traverse City Planning Commission special meeting. This is April 30th, and I would like to start with our land acknowledgement. The land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. So I've called this meeting to order. How about roll call? Are we taking it?
Yeah, I can go ahead and take that. So, Commissioner Tuller,
Here.
Deturi,
Here.
Anderson,
Present.
McGillivray,
Here.
Heller,
Here.
O'Brien,
Present.
Treadwell is absent, Knapp is absent, Madeline is excused, and I think we got everyone correct.
Except for me. First you
Debbie.
I'm here. Okay. So that takes us to today's topic for consideration, which is our continued review of the draft master plan, this time the magazine. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Winter.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So we're kind of at the last step of the review process. First and foremost, thank you for your commitment. I don't know about you, but this has felt like a marathon the last month, a lot of reading, a lot to digest, a lot to discuss. So really appreciate, again, your commitment to that. So procedurally, we are at the point where we're reviewing the magazine portion. This is really what people think of when they think of a plan. This is the prescriptive part that's providing direction, that's intended to help guide policy decisions. I want to take a step back and revisit how this plan has been structured, because it's a little different than how we've done plans in the past. So the plan has a 20-year vision. However, the action plan and the prescriptive component here is intended to be what the city can achieve in 5 years aligned with that vision. So it's not all encompassing. We really spent a lot of time whittling this down. I think I said before, we started with kind of staff and consultants working on a list of topics for the action plan that we had pulled from our interaction throughout the process with the public and things like that. Then we had our stakeholder groups. We had a number of those, and as you can imagine, the list just kept ballooning. Every meeting would get like 12 more like steps. So then we had to work through and figure out, okay, which ones really don't fall under the city's purview, all right? Which ones are not the actions of the city, but maybe opportunities where the city could partner or support and really focus in on the ones that would be the responsibility of the city. Of course, the city is not bound to only do what is in this plan, but these are some steps that the city can start taking to implement the plan vision. As required, every 5 years, we have to review the master plan and we may update it. So the intent is 5 years from now, when we do that review, we take a look at the action plan, the prescriptive portion, and identify what's been accomplished so far and what do we need in the next 5 years to keep moving towards that desired vision. And that may change. You know, we might find that we have a number of items that we weren't able to get to that carry over. New priorities may present themselves that weren't part of the discussion that we've currently been going through that we need to visit and address and things of that nature. So that's kind of how this is intended to work. As far as the process goes moving forward, this is our last scheduled day of review. So depending on what type of changes or edits come out of this process, if Sarah and her team can have them all incorporated by Thursday when the packet goes out for next week, our intent is to bring the plan back for you all, since it's a regular meeting, to make a motion to send it to the City Commission for further review. That is not a approval by the Planning Commission. That is a procedural step required in the Planning Enabling Act, that the Planning Commission, through action, send it to the City Commission. Then the City Commission, which would likely be May 20th, would make a motion to open it up for the official 63-day public review. It is during that time period that we will be reviewing these documents with the City Commission. I have a meeting with the mayor and city manager next week to talk about how they want to schedule that for the coming meetings. We will also be having our public open house during that time period, likely at the end of June, here in this building. And then once the 63-day review period is up, we will have to have a Planning Commission public hearing. That is required. The Planning Commission, by resolution, would then need to adopt the plan, if they so choose, but we would have to use resolution per the act. And then the city has passed an ordinance, which is allowable, that then requires that the City Commission also approve master plan. The difference being the Planning Enabling Act requires 2/3 or 6 planning commissioners to vote in the affirmative to approve, where at the City Commission level, it's just a simple majority. That's really the only difference between those two. So, any questions with the process or kind of where we are right now? Any of this? Yeah, Brian.
So when we send it up to the city commission the first time, do they have an option of, they don't like something, sending it back, asking us to change it?
Mm-hmm. Yep, they could. Ideally, what we have asked for them is, to send it out for review for that 63-day time period, because we get kind of stuck in a holding pattern with plans at the end where we have to wait for that clock to expire. So since sending that out to review is not an approval or an endorsement of the plan, we're hoping then that they are supportive of reviewing it during that 63-day period, so that we can let the weeks through the calendar but yeah, they could completely send it back. I don't anticipate that. Throughout this process, we've had joint meetings with them to keep them abreast so they're not caught at the end with a finished product that they don't know anything about. So we'll see where those discussions take us.
Thank you.
Yep.
And
Good
we are getting additional public input too during those 63 days. So I think it would be beneficial to keep it moving so we can get to that, because there'll probably be changes that come out of that as well that will need to take place either before your public hearing or at your public hearing, just as additional information. So.
Yep. And so, yeah, we'll keep compiling all the public feedback we get, as well as at the open house. That'll be shared with the Planning Commission. You guys can read through that, decide what changes you may or may not want to make as a result of that input. Yeah, then kind of go from there.
How would you like to move this today?
What's that?
How would you like to move through this tonight?
All right, well, I guess we'll just kind of go ahead and get started. So this is intended, again, to be the part, like if you really wanted to know the plan of the city, this is what you would. The rest is supporting. It's kind of like the why. This is the how we get to where we want to go. So we will have the acknowledgments in there. We have some empty pages because by law, in either the front page or the back page, we have to have the resolutions included in the plan from both bodies. So we'll have a space for that. So the first topic is just executive summary. So that's kind of a summary of the plan and everything that's in it right now. Were there any questions or comments on that chapter or that section?
Thank you. I'm interested in how the numbered priorities here align with Traverse City's citywide priorities. Was there an attempt at any point to sort of connect those dots, or tell me more about the source of these?
The guiding principles?
Yeah.
Yeah, so early on in the process, we gave the strategic plan from 22, I think it was, that the city did with its goals, and it has its 6 bullet-pointed goals from it. When the last commission was elected, they spent a couple Saturdays with the consultant coming up with that. So that was a starting point. And then throughout the process, these guiding principles went through a number of iterations. So we started with the survey, and correct me if I'm wrong, going back like 2 years here, putting comments out there and letting people rank priorities and things like that, give us feedback. Then we came up with a rough draft of some guiding principles that we heard from the public. Then we put it back out to the public, say, hey, did we get this right, to comment on it? And then we did further refinement based on that feedback, and then that's how we ultimately.
And they started with some of those strategic plan ideas and then other working plans that the city has to generate all these different ideas. So yeah, it kind of got whittled down and tweaked. And so we did survey, open house, so those were public, and we had the stakeholders work through them as well as kind of individual, partners that we have or that either work or have businesses in the community. So they just kept getting tweaked and refined down to get down to the 6 that we have. And the numbers are not priorities or an order, right?
Right.
They're just to have numbers, so you can say principle number 1.
Did you receive any feedback during the process about priorities? I think, Sean, you mentioned that there was some, that was part of the conversation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
I think initially, because the survey, so 2 years ago, so I'm sorry I don't remember exactly, there was quite a list that we had. And even when we got to the open house, there was quite a list of items that kind of, I think it was in the survey, that bubbled up kind of the top priorities. And then we received comments on a reduced list at the open house and then kind of reduced it down. And by reduced, a lot of it more was combining the principles together.
we collapsed some of them where
Yeah.
there was overlap and reworded them, so like there was so much similarity between, like, say, 2 of them that were like, well, we can put this together as
Sure.
so, and that's what we did through the iteration process.
Thank you.
And I'd say the master plan leadership team helped with that. too.
Yeah, and I want to forgive me for providing that overlooking that,
Yeah.
but yeah, so we had the master plan leadership team that we did meet with monthly on this project throughout the last 2 years leading up to them moving this on to the planning commission. And so that was a group of planning commissioners, city commissioners, city staff, city residents, all combined. So we had a lot of good feedback, a lot of good discussions in those meetings. So that's part of the message. I think when this plan gets to the city commission, this has been vetted by the leadership team, this has been vetted by the planning commission, city commission. So it hasn't been created in a vacuum, and those meetings were public and posted and made all those materials.
Just curious, will the master plan leadership team have a last opportunity to review this?
I mean, they could. It was really intended, our last meeting was their last meeting.
That was our
So any
review.
changes subsequent to that would,
Yeah, because they had made their changes, so now these are your changes that are coming up, so they essentially blessed their work and now pass the baton to you.
okay.
Yep.
So did they kind of see it in the state that we're receiving it in?
Yeah.
With
Yep, these 2 different
things
documents.
to be added?
Yep,
Okay.
correct, yeah. And we'll get into it in more detail, but you'll see a large print map on your desks. That's different than the map that you have in here, and the changes all came from the last leadership team meeting. So that was their recommendations that we have it in this map, but we got to incorporate it into all these little, et cetera. So that's just taking time, but something we hope to have done by Thursday. Yep. So yeah, our 6 principles.
I do have something for that first
Yeah,
chunk.
please.
So the paragraph right above guiding principles,
Uh-huh.
there's a line about halfway through the paragraph that says, "This is the portion of the document that will be used by city officials and elected leaders to guide their decision-making."
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we should also add a / appointed officials,
Okay.
because planning commissioners are not elected, nor are they like city staff.
Yep.
I just felt like it would be more clear.
I would agree with that. Thank you. We'll take note. Okay.
In principle 1,
Yeah,
can we add Boardman Lake?
of course.
We seem to forget it in a lot of these things, but, and the other thing about 1 is, we mentioned the shores, but we really don't mention the waters.
Mm.
And the waters, are a huge part of us.
Yeah.
So that's just, and then I had another issue in number 2, the very end.
With me 1 second. Okay, ready for you.
We talk about city policy should respect, preserve, and incorporate the heritage into our community fabric and provide opportunity for people of all backgrounds, ability, and experiences to be here. Be seems kind of weak. Just to be here? Can we have thrive here?
I like thrive. Is everyone good with that?
Be's kind of flat.
Yeah. We're going to manifest some thriving. Yep.
And then just a clarification question on number 4. We use maintain in 2 different ways. We say maintain and connect our neighborhoods, and then we talked about well-maintained properties. So one is talking about neighborhoods, one is talking about properties. I'm fine with that, but is that what the intent was?
Yeah, I think it was, maintaining our properties within the neighborhood. So maybe we can clarify what you're saying there, like to.
Within and between neighborhoods.
Well, I mean, I'm fine with it the way it is. I just want to make sure we're talking about maintaining and connecting our neighborhoods, maintain and connect our neighborhoods, but also to maintain the properties inside the neighborhood. Either way, it works both ways.
Yep.
That's it for chapter 1 for me.
All right.
Anyone else have any comments on this section?
I mean, I would ask, as residents of Traverse City, do any of these principles surprise you? Or is it pretty consistent with the values that that's kind of how we felt through the process too. Nothing was out of the blue, eye-opening that like we had never thought of before. It's what we hear from the community quite a bit. So in a way that's helpful, it's affirming the other plans and stuff that helped create this. So
The only other note I had from this section was both number 5 and number 3 start with the word encourage. It just bothers me. Like, can one of them be promote and encourage or something, just to like shake it up a tiny bit so there's not 2 that start with the word encourage? And that's really nitpicky, so I'm so sorry.
I do the same though all the time. So
Good catch.
That's a good.
I read, I don't need to tell you how I stumbled into it, but I was like, didn't I just read that word?
I mean, you would probably be surprised how much as planners we use a thesaurus to come up with like, what's another
I'm
word
sure.
for encourage that's not
Yeah.
encourage, because we don't like to use the same word in every
Right.
sentence and stuff,
true.
but we want the meaning to be the same. But yeah, kind of
Exactly.
mix it up.
Yeah. And I can appreciate your comments because like you actually read through the document. You know, how many planning commissioners like just kind of like breeze through. So I do really appreciate the comments.
Especially all the wordsmithing that went on at the master plan leadership.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
It was constant.
There was a lot of that, yes. All right, so if there's no other comments on chapter 1, we'll move to chapter 2, which is the action plan. So we just kind of present an overview. We took from the leadership team, one thing that we wanted to, demonstrate in this is that the planning department, outside of the plan recommendations, is quite busy on a day-to-day basis. And so we just want to kind of categorize, okay, the planning department actually, outside of implementing the plan, has these daily tasks. That was originally included in the table of the action plan. The leadership team said, it's not really an action to be done. It's something that's ongoing. Let's separate it. So that's why you see it now in a box there. If you had looked at an earlier version that like the leadership team had. So we just kind of like laid that out there. We do provide staff liaisons to quite a few boards that we do the minutes and agendas and all that kind of stuff and the proper notices. And that does take quite a bit of our time as we move through that. So those are the 6 things, just kind of highlighting that the planning department has to keep doing on a day-to-day basis. And then when you turn the page to page 12, this is where we get into the specific projects. So as you'll see, some are somewhat broad, then broken down into individual specific steps. Others are somewhat specific in and of themselves, so there aren't subcategories within them. We did try to present them with a time frame. So which ones do we expect to get done in 1 to 3 years, and then moving forward into that 3 to 5 year time period. And as you get to the bottom, we have some that are talking about the 5 to 10 years. So even though we're really focusing on the first 5 years, we do have a few here that we might need to start at some point in that first 5 years, but we realize they're lengthy processes and they take some time. Then we put them into categories as to the type of action they are, whether they're zoning, planning, funding, special projects, communications, things of that nature, just to kind of help break this down. We have the responsible party. This is a land use plan, so much of this, not surprisingly, falls on the planning and zoning department to kind of carry the water for. But you will see that quite a few of these have other responsible parties listed, such as the DDA and engineering, sometimes the city manager, maybe the city commission. And then we have our supporting parties. So even though the planning department may have to take the lead on a lot of these, we will have to rely on other departments to help us carry that to the finish line because of their expertise in the various fields that we simply don't have, because that's not our field. So with that, we have almost 4 pages of actions, and I'm sure there may be some thoughts, considerations. And again, this is not everything that could possibly be done. You know, we could spend forever. We could do 80 pages just of actions. But what we have found in communities that have action plans with a list of 150 items is it's almost too overwhelming. People don't know where to start. And you know, we'll come to those communities. When I worked at Beckett Raider and be like, okay, let's look at your old master plan. What have you done from that 150 in the last 15 years? And they're like, well, we did 2 of them, you know? So it's like, just putting it on paper, if you don't have the resources or the ability to coordinate and move them forward, doesn't necessarily help.
And even these will have to be prioritized in some way
Right.
by the, whatever body it is. right?
Yeah, and as we spoke in January, this is something, once this gets adopted, we'll have to bring this back to the planning commission, have that discussion. All right, what do you want to bite off first? Which one do you want to start working? Because that provides us direction. We want to make sure that as staff, we're using our resources consistent with what your desires are to start implementing that. So,
The only note I had in this section, I thought it was really well organized, is that if there's no distinct priority in each of those sections, like 1 to 3, 3 to 5, whatever, I think that should be explicitly called out. It should just be like, these are listed here, they're all here. Or if you did take time to put those in priority order, it should just be called out in some sort of little like caption or a footnote or something, so that way the reader understands that either they're in that A, B, C, D order on purpose or they're not.
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, none of these are presented with prioritization.
Right.
Yep.
But if you're a layperson
Yeah,
reading
you
through
think-
that,
Right.
you could
Yeah.
expect it to be.
Number
It's a
one's
good
most
point.
important, A is the most important.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and as a planning commission, how many times were you told, well, housing is your number 1 priority? No, it just happened to be number 1 on the list.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Right.
ranked in priority
Yeah.
of goals or anything like that. So we can provide,
A little
That's a good
sentence or
point.
something.
yep, clarity that numbering does not indicate
There's
that.
some really great stuff in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this list, it was, I mean, so hard. Like Sean mentioned, we started out with, a page. We got some input from the leadership team. We got input from stakeholders. It just continued to grow, and then trying to either collapse items that made sense, think about what can actually be accomplished. And it is really important to have an action plan that you can work with. I mean, even 4 pages is still overwhelming. But but
Yeah.
we're trying to get somewhere. And if it's not on your action plan, doesn't mean you can't do it. And if something else comes up, but hopefully this will help. These are intended to help move this whole big plan forward for you for the next 5 years.
I had. Oh, go ahead, Brent.
No.
Go ahead.
Jay?
I had 2 things. Pattern book homes. I love that. I think that's really cool. And then on page 15, it was action number 18, I think. Yeah. So explore implementation of the community land trust model in Traverse City. We have a land bank, and I just for clarity, like the county has a land bank, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
What are the differences other than one is Traverse City Land Trust and county is Grand Traverse County Land Bank? And how do they work differently, I guess?
Yeah.
They do.
Okay.
And forgive me, I'm going to do my best here.
Yeah.
Okay. So the land bank has its own function that it does, and it can hold land. That's essentially the land bank. One of the biggest benefits of the land bank, talking with Chris Forsyth in the county, is it can clear title real quickly.
Okay.
So if there's a property that might have title issues and the land bank has it, they can clear that title so it can get developed and things like that. So for instance, right now, there's a piece of property, the old railroad right away behind McGough's. And so it is currently held in the county land bank.
Right.
We, at any point, the city, it's city property, can submit a letter and they will transfer ownership to the city.
Okay.
And we actually had that letter written and delivered at one point,
Yeah.
like 2 years ago. But the city manager at the time then withdrew that letter because there are some benefits of being in the land bank. There
Gotcha.
are some funds available to the land bank that they can use to like survey the property, which they did recently, to do that title clearing and things like that. And one thing we find with old right-of-ways is there is a lot of title work.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't platted as a railroad.
Yeah.
So that's that mechanism. The community land trust. Man, I wish Yarrow Brown was here to explain this a little better because it is a confusing concept. So
I only asked because Tony Lenti at one point told me they're essentially the same, and I was like, I don't think that's right. But
that's not the
I
way
trust you,
that
Tony. I guess.
So the community land trust is a tool that can be used to help with affordable housing. A lot of ski towns in Colorado have started using this. And so what happens is like let's say a house is built on property that's part of the community land trust. And it doesn't have to be contiguous. It can be individual parcels. When you buy the house, you don't own the land. All right.
Yeah.
This can help decrease the costs of it. You can, what's it called when you pass away and you pass on your property somewhere else? And yeah, you can set it up so someone can inherit the property. You can sell the property, but there's a limit to how much profit you can make on it because
Right.
you bought it at a discounted price.
Okay.
You can make additions to it, and so it's like ownership. You
Yeah.
don't have the land though, but it's a way to keep the taxes, or not the taxes, but the cost of housing down.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
The nice thing about the community land trust is if like the city was to set one up, they're not bound to just within the city
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah.
So they could be acquiring property outside for that purpose.
Mhm.
Will we see you possibly?
I hope so. We're having a party for you later.
Yeah. We hear sirens and the fire
Yeah.
chief leaves, so he might be busy for a little while. Yeah, so this area has not done much with community land trusts. I know there have been some in Leelanau County.
Yeah.
Down around the Grand Rapids area.
Yeah.
They have quite a few of them. So,
Okay.
And a lot of times the trusts too, not all the time, but are more of like a nonprofit holding versus like the land bank is a government
Yeah. Okay.
portion
Cool.
as it, and you may partner with the trust, but you may not be the managing kind of partner of it.
Okay.
yeah, because I think the one in Leelanau County,
Yeah, that's like a nonprofit,
It's a-
totally
yeah.
independent.
Yeah.
But they do rely on, land bank properties sometimes and
Okay.
different components. So, I mean, I would agree. I'm not gonna argue with
Tony.
Tony. I mean, he's very familiar with housing, and so that
I'd argue with him.
But they do have some different. I think they have some different functions and pros and cons
Okay.
depending on what you're looking to do.
Yeah. Cool. That was it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sean, I think your intro comments sort of queued up one of my questions, which is, what is your confidence level that this list of actions can be accomplished within our current city capacity and a 5-year time frame?
That's a good question, and I don't have a solid answer for you. I've never seen a master plan come close, or a community come close to implementing everything in its master plan. Being pared down, I think we're increasing our odds by doing it this way.
Are we at 50/50? Are we?
It's hard to say because we don't know what the city commission's going to hand down. That's a key part.
In
Like
terms of budgeting?
budgeting or even priorities.
Yeah, whoever the
I'll give you an
responsible party is.
example. 2 years ago, Brian was part of it. It was the adult use cannabis retailers. You know, that came down, that took a tremendous amount of my time to work on the maps and go to the meetings and stuff like that. That wasn't on the planning commission goals, it wasn't on department goals, but that's what was handed to us, you know?
Sure.
We may have, well, probably won't, but, you know, if it was 20 years ago and something like Morgan Farms got dropped on our desk as an application, that would probably take up a year to go through that whole process. So it's really dependent on what we get. I will say, for better or worse, permitting is down. The cost of capital is very expensive right now. The cost of construction is expensive. So we're seeing that dip, which frees up some of our time. So it helps that we now have Leslie in the office as another planner as well. And depending on some of these, if it's the city commission's priority to move them on in a timely manner, then we might need to budget to bring in some consultants to help with the legwork of it.
So, judging from your comments, it sounds as though perhaps planning capacity would be the limiting factor in accomplishing many of these?
Yes, many of them, but I don't want that to be perceived as me saying we need more
Oh,
staff in
no,
our department.
no,
'Cause
no,
I don't
I'm
think
just
that's
trying
the
to-
solution.
trying to
Yeah, it's going to come
understand.
down to the capacity at the time that we have available. to work. So,
Okay.
um,
And then, I guess a related question. Some of the phrasing of the actions are, you know, to consider, to explore, and I wondered what that means to you in terms of deliverables.
Well, that's a good question. So some of these items, we don't know enough specifics to say you need to do A, B, and C. So they're at a more premature starting point. Like
So
you,
it's a conceptual review? Is that the intent here? or-
yeah, or start considering it to, you know, because again, a master plan's at 30,000 feet, you know, so
Yeah.
we might have to explore it to figure out, okay, what is the plan? In order to do this, the planning commission identifies A, B, and C need to be done. This plan won't get into that level of detail on everything, so that's why some of these items are a little more vague. There's going to need to be more input from the planning commission as we work on them specifically.
So deliverables TBD.
Yeah, you know, and some of that is going to come from you all and what you want delivered out of it.
Okay,
And also
thank you.
how the responsible parties prioritize too.
Yeah, so their coordination of priorities is going to be an important thing. You know, when it shows some on here that we're working with the DDA or light and power, well, we can't force our priorities necessarily on them, you know, but we have great working relationships with both component units of government, and I don't see that being a problem. But, you know, we might have to wait 6 months until they finish a big project that they're working on, until they're available to start engaging in some of this.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those words too are, these kind of bubbled up through the process, but have not been discussions that have been had by the planning commission or city commission. So we don't want to make assumptions that this is going to happen because it's not been talked about, kind of public facing, to actually go through that process and get input on it.
Perhaps to Anna's earlier comment about either clarify that these are not prioritized, or the ones that are fuzzy maybe get a lower priority.
Need additional, yeah, and we can put that in the preface at the beginning about.
Yeah, we can explain some of the terminology and why we used it.
Yeah.
I like that.
Brian?
There is a lot on here.
There is.
Having been on the planning commission, even though you have another staff person now, that's a lot, especially in this town. There's a lot of process. We can get into something and spend months on it, and then either we or the city commission just says, nope,
Yeah.
this is not going to work here. Sometimes you don't know it till you get into it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long list, I think, so. And I'll be honest, not everything on this list is my priority, but that's not me. I question some things about whether or not you should be doing it. But when it says planning and zoning, that's not me, that's you. If you want to audit the public engagement process, got time to do that, that's great. So I mean, but it's always going to be, I know this is not we're going to do all this stuff, we're gonna look at a lot of this stuff. Some of the stuff, I'm not quite sure what's meant in the statement. And I'm not gonna go through all of it. I figure when we get to it, figure it out then.
Yeah.
I do have one thing that I find a little odd in here. And that's when we get into the 3 to 5 year plan. Or 3 to 5 years, you bring up implementing the master plan. Are we really supposed to be waiting for year 3 to start implementing the master plan? Aren't we supposed to do that all along?
Yeah, I'm taking a sabbatical after this. That's my plan. But no, I see what you're saying. That is kind of an interesting one to list on
I
there.
mean, we're all, that's part of our plan is to implement the master. You could put that up on top, explore zoning amendments related to implementing the master plan. Because otherwise, see, I've already trimmed the list down.
Zoning amendments
you.
related to.
Yeah, I think that one was on its own at one time and got collapsed into here, and it's been moved a couple of times. So
Yeah.
maybe we can explain it in a better way. I think we wanted to add it to the list so that if there were other items that needed to get brought in, it makes sense. I mean, but that the whole time you're trying to implement it, so maybe it's just more of a
what it
paragraph or
says here is
something.
explore zoning amendments related to implementing the master
Right.
plan. It's,
But they're all about implementing the master
I
plan.
guess, yeah.
I mean, the things about doing the mobility plan is part of the master plan, or implementing the master plan. It's pretty much, most of the stuff is, some of it may not be called out in the master
I'm not
plan,
sure it even has to.
but in many ways it is, so.
And so I think what we need to do there is take that item, remove it,
Yeah.
and make sure that we have strong enough language in the intro to state that this action plan is how you implement
Yeah.
Right.
the master plan, and provide
Good catch,
that.
Brian. Anybody else have anything on this section?
Get to know it quite well.
Yes.
So-
Move along.
All right. Next chapter is 3 future land use map, and this correlates to the large print map that is on your desk right now. So you're required to have a future land use plan. We know that zoning is specific in its boundaries. Future land use maps are not intended to have specific boundaries, but permeable, breathable boundaries. They're generalized areas where things can occur. That's why in some places you see things that are more like a circle shape. We are unique in that we're small and we're largely built out. So when you look at the future land use map compared to some of our surrounding neighbors, you know, we're looking at a lot of transformation and infill as opposed to greenfield development that you see occurring in some of the surrounding jurisdictions. So this map reflects the changes, again, that came from the leadership team. There are 2 additional changes prior to the meeting Sarah and I recognized. So one is where we're currently sitting right now. The public, quasi-public is more like kind of a phrase used for like government, institutional uses. We need to extend that all the way up to Washington because this whole kind of block is government offices. And the other missing part is the DPS building on that block on Woodmere. So we will correct that. That's a simple fix. And then we'll reflect all those changes in each of the category descriptions that we have and update those individual maps as well. So that is currently in the works right now. So start with just any comments on the map at this time. And like I said, it's gone through a lot of iterations as well. I know, Mitch, you were on that leadership team at our last meeting, and Debbie through this, so.
For accessibility purposes,
Mhm.
I think the text should be on a solid background. Because if you look at like Eastern, it is so hard to read against that blue background. So if you can put like an opaque background behind the text.
Yeah, and we can move the label to the east.
And they don't.
Yeah,
they
so
don't
it's
appear when
over
you
the
print
light
them out
orange.
either.
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
Garfield and Boone, like I laughed to myself about how Boone has like that green dot in the center of it. So if there's any way to like make the text super easily readable, depending on either the background color it's on, changing the text, or just moving it, that would be swell.
Yep.
You can put a halo or something around it, I think would help, just in
Yeah.
general.
Agreed.
The little green flies.
It is very funny. Tiny little green dot in Boone.
Yep.
Well, that's a park.
Yeah, it is.
A very tiny one.
Bigger than the one to the east of it, though.
Well, they were both single platted residential lots that never got developed.
Yep.
Looking ahead to the 63-day period for community review and so forth, is there what you think would be an easy way for community members to be able to see what's changed? You know, I mean, I can look at a particular street that I'm familiar with and say, oh, is that use intended to change in the future? But is there a way that people who aren't familiar with individual streets might be able to have highlighted for them where the changes are?
Yeah, I think that may be covered when we get to the zoning plan component later in this chapter. Or not this
Okay.
chapter, but this magazine portion. So
Okay,
can we get to that point
Sure.
and revisit and see if that meets
Sure.
what you're talking about? Okay.
I had a question about commercial gateways.
Mm-hmm.
I think, is it Garfield is like the only one that's like city, right? Munson and Front Street, those are all MDOT.
State trunk lines, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I guess like my question would be how, of the changes that we foresee for commercial gateways, how confident are we that they'll happen in those areas?
Well, the land use outside the right-of-way,
Yeah.
we're pretty confident
Okay.
that we can make those changes.
Mhm.
You're right, the state trunk lines, we have limited control
Yeah.
over. We do work with MDOT, though.
Yeah.
And they have, in the last 2 years, become good partners
Okay.
with us, you know? So I think we have a good relationship there.
Good.
You know, it doesn't mean we're going to get what we want all
Yeah.
the time. You know, that's just how things work. But, no, I feel pretty good about it.
I asked because I live near one of these and I'd like to see it better than
Yeah.
it is.
I would
So.
agree. Yep. Any questions on the map as a whole? If not, we can go and kind of flip through each of these. So we broke out on the subsequent pages each of the future land use categories and what that can look like, gives a description, just some model imagery of what that might appear. With that imagery, we do have a key of what are some of the notable kind of development patterns and components that came out of this planning process. Some of that was largely dictated by what was covered at the last meeting on this topic, so like 3 weeks ago, where we had our meeting out at Hickory with the visual preference survey. We showed a bunch of different development examples for each of the corridors, had people vote on which amenities or features they liked the best, what type of building design, and so that's what drove a lot of it here. So yeah, the commercial gateways are most of our corridors as you're coming into the city. Most of these properties today are zoned either HR for hotel resort or C3. C3 is our most auto-centric zoning district that we have. So that's one that allows drive-through, car washes, things like that. We'll have plenty to talk about on those type of uses that we'd like to bring back to you, because that was a conversation that came up at the master plan leadership team. Like, for instance, and maybe we talked about this at that last meeting, because we talked about True North, of maybe making some of those uses, and I don't say this often, but taking them from by right to special land use permit. Because special land use permit allows you to make a more subjective decision based on the use and the location. When it's by right, legally, if they meet all the prescribed standards, then we have to approve them. And I think we did talk about that, didn't we, about True North? Because you two
Yeah.
had mentioned that
Yeah.
process. And
We've also talked about it in terms of drive-throughs multiple times.
yeah, so that's an example of something that we would like to bring back to you. some of this stuff. Now, another thing that we want to talk to you at some point about is, you know, we have this future land use map that tells us what we want to do. That's going to correlate to the zoning that needs to change. Historically, we've largely waited for people to come in and apply for a change. That doesn't really help guide the outcome that you want. That's being reactive to it. So we may, as you all may, as a planning commission, us supporting you as staff, may want to look at rezoning. So in 2014, Acme Township adopted new zoning ordinance or new master plan, and they rezoned a big portion of their township just based on that. Because otherwise, you get into issues of spot zoning where you might have a new future land use category that calls for a change in zoning and only one property owner wants to do that. And legally, we should be avoiding spot zoning. So it's a way that the planning commission, through support of the city commission, can better direct this process and make it a little more predictable. Because if the zoning is already changed in place, that signals to people that, okay, now these rules are set, as opposed to, we'll consider changing the rules. Well, the plan's telling you what to change it to at this point. So I think, Mitch, you had brought that up previously. I think when we were looking at the Third Coast Bakery and rezoning that, about how we could maybe be more proactive in changing our zoning. So that's one that we can. So, all right, so
Because, yeah, it wasn't just that one parcel. The entire Munson Avenue corridor is a hodgepodge of zoning types, as various rezonings have happened over the years and different development projects have come through.
Yep. And one thing that, kind of in that same vein, that we'd like to have as a future conversation with you is conditional rezoning. It is a administrative nightmare.
Okay.
Because you have, that stays with the land. You have to always monitor those conditions, and it's allowed in the Zoning Enabling Act, but it's not required that we have to allow it. I talked to the city attorney about this. And what we're finding is it's being used more as a workaround around zoning. Like, I want to do this, and so I want to change the zoning, but I'll not do these things. I'll agree to that. And we can't negotiate on a conditional rezoning. You have to either accept it or not.
How much of the additional work for the planning staff is a result of the sometimes extensive and start-stop inconclusive negotiations between the developer, the property owner, and neighborhood people? I'm just thinking about the property right across the street here that they went for conditional rezoning, and it was on our agenda 3 times before we actually voted on it. And I don't know how much. I know that each of those times would have meant several hours for you or other staff behind the scenes, but I don't know how typical that is for the processes.
I'd say it's not very typical. That one was a little bit of an anomaly, but that was a case, again, where conditional rezoning was not being really used for its intended purpose. They wanted to conditionally rezone it with a condition that it could not be torn down if their pro forma didn't work out. I'm like, well, that's not how conditional rezoning is supposed to work. And so,
You can put a deed restriction, and that would be the
which
tool
is
to actually
ultimately
make-
what they decided
Yeah.
to do. It kept appearing on agendas because they wanted to push it through because they wanted, it was a condition of their purchase agreement, was that they have it rezoned. So that's why they wanted to get there, but they hadn't had the conversations with TCAPs, who owned the property at the time, about deed restrictions. We eventually got them all in a room, got them to the right direction on that, and it worked out good for everyone in the end. But I would not say it's an unusual amount of time on the front end. That was just a weird one.
And I think there's a lot of legacy, like enforcement with it after it goes through. You know, that it is kind of a deed restriction. It gets recorded against the property, but it's that agreement between the city and whoever owns the property. And for everybody to have their own little bit here or there, it can be a nightmare when you get too many of them to do that enforcement. But I think the biggest thing in my experience too with that is people just using it to get around the zoning ordinance. I've not experienced one that was like, yes, this is a perfect opportunity and what this was intended for. Most of the time, it's I want to do something, it's not allowed, I don't want to amend your ordinance, so I'm going to go through the conditional rezoning process instead.
Yeah. And so again, we spend a lot of time in discussions about rezoning properties. So if the idea is let's keep planning staff from being bogged down and working on a lot of minutia, then going ahead and rezoning the properties proactively would put in place what the expectations are, and that would save us a lot of time in the long run.
I think sometimes you're also seeing conditional rezonings just to satisfy neighbors by putting these limits on it. And sometimes I've seen where they throw everything in the including the kitchen sink. And, you know, we as planning commissioners and you as staff can always say, this is going to be a nightmare if 5 years from now, these new owners come in and they want to put in a bubblegum shop, but we've banned bubblegum shops from this usage because someone thinks it promotes dirty sidewalks, you know? And you just, I mean, but some of the stuff is like, what's really the purpose behind it? Why are we banning this? And that doesn't make any sense. And then you kind of send that message to the applicant right up front. We're looking for bare bones. You're gonna do a conditional rezoning. You better only be addressing one issue. That's it.
Yeah.
So,
And frankly, it works better when it's for a specific project that they want to build. So TC Lofts, right? They wanted to go up above the 45 feet, I think, to build that community space, you know. That is easier to administer project as opposed to a list of uses that can and cannot be allowed there. And it gets a little wonky too, the way it's written in our ordinance, you know, once approved, you have to have 75% of construction completed in 2 years, 100% in 3 years, and, you know, that looks like 75% of a building, I don't know, you know, like as close as we can be. Are they making progress on it essentially? Which is kind of weird because someone rezones a property, we don't say, well, now you have 2 years to do something with it. It just stays with them. So I think it can be abused. Tough.
something to
Sometimes
look
they have a
at.
good pitch, you know, like, well, we do need that affordable housing, and you know, but maybe there's a better way to do it.
We can always amend it. And I think you're right about the limits, especially today. It takes so long. If you're building a big project, it takes so long to get it started. Between the financing, getting pre-sales, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, this
laborers.
body had to, within the last year, do the Homestretch Carver conditional rezoning over again because their MISHDA funding, sometimes they have to apply multiple rounds and the time expired. They are allowed to have a 1-year extension. They exercised that, but then they had to go through that whole process again. And, you know, that slowed them down by 3 months before they could break ground. They had their funding secured.
What's the point?
Yeah. It's a lot of procedural bureaucracy, you know, and we had a good meeting today, and I'll talk about this in announcements about a community event holding on June 18th, but, you know, sometimes government can become so layered with bureaucracy that, frankly, people that aren't living in that bureaucracy every day can't understand it. That breeds distrust, you know, because if you can't understand the rules, it's hard to trust that the rules are there for a good reason or the process exists as a safeguard and things like that. And part of our RRC designation was over a 2-year period, the city going through and making amendments to streamline and clarify those processes. But there's always room for more, of course, on that.
We could add this to the action plan.
Page 5, the Brian's addendum.
I do have 2 notes on this section.
Yes.
So upon reading it through, I believe that page 18 is great. It should be there. It's the cover page. page 19 should, in my opinion, come after page 20.
The map.
Yeah, because you're separating huge chunks of
Yeah.
text, and it was really
And that
annoying to me
that
trying to
happens-
read through that.
that happens
every
quite a
single
bit,
section.
yeah.
It's every single
and that
section.
was I kind of got lost a couple of times. I was like, wait, where did I leave off?
Yeah,
So
so,
that-
if you put
that's
the
a good
cute
point.
one with the little like bubbles that explain, I think that just goes before, and then you see all the text together explaining
Yeah.
the section.
Yep.
And then the only other thought I had was something about these bubbles. So when the images with the numbered circles, are these supposed to be recommended uses or focuses? I think that should be clarified because there's no descriptor to the user what those are for.
So maybe where we have the legend, we have a description above it. Okay.
Just like, and again, it could just be a tiny little call out that's text, or a title even that just says suggestions, recommended uses, or something that just delineates to the user that that's what you're trying to describe in the image.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because otherwise you're making the reader try to figure that out on their own. And
Right.
Yep. We
Very
can
good
do
points.
that. And we'll make that consistent through all the.
clearly I read this so finely. I was like, nope, don't like.
All right. Any other comments on commercial gateway?
That's funny with the map because I kept looking at that and I'm like, I don't like it, but I can't tell you why. But you figured it out for me, so I appreciate it.
I figured it out very quickly. After the first section, I was like, nope, that needs to go up because I can't. It was the interruption in the paragraph.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't remember what the last.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember that it was about transportation and mobility by the time I had to go to the other side of the map.
I like that.
Yep. All right, so next up is neighborhood center. So this is more localized commercial is what it's intending. And you'll see that it's dispersed throughout the city. We don't have as much on the west side because the west side, those neighborhoods have closer proximity to downtown where we have a lot of that commercial. But one thing that we set off from the get-go, even in our proposal or RFP that we put out, was, again, that concept of the 15-minute city. So where you have access to amenities that can meet your day-to-day needs without having to necessarily travel far outside your neighborhood to get those. We've been having conversations internally that we'll have with you in the future too about neighborhoods. You know, they've become very monocrop, if you will, of like one type of use. Whereas in the history of the city, we allowed the incorporation of uses within the neighborhoods to serve the residents of the neighborhood. So I think it's 11th and Maple. That used to be a grocery store, then it was Salvation Army. We have Deering's as an example. On Cass Street, there was a commercial building that had like a birthing services and the herb shop. You know, that was a credit union at one point, all these different services. When we look in the Polk directory, but now it's non-conforming. So when it hit the market, we had people in constantly like, oh, can I make this into a coffee shop? No, even though it's a commercial building, it's been there historically commercial. You just couldn't change it to that use. That's going to be a conversation that we'll have with you all too, is implementing the idea of neighborhood center. One thing that we had discussed is maybe creating an overlay district that sits on top of the zoning, like we did with the marijuana, cannabis, that identifies certain locations for maybe neighborhood scale commercial. You know, so it would likely be corner properties at key locations. It might have a limit to the square footage or tighter list of commercial uses that would be allowed geared towards that neighborhood service area. One thing we talked about is no off-street parking because it's not meant to be a vehicular magnet that people are coming into, but really to serve those more within walking distance, utilize the street parking, and maybe a requirement that there needs to be at least one dwelling unit in that structure because it is within a neighborhood, so it needs to serve that purpose. You've probably seen this in many cities that you've visited in older neighborhoods. Often on a corner, you might have a laundromat, a little bodega, a little coffee shop, a restaurant. And they have the potential to add to the vitality and vibrancy. That's one of the things that we're trying to get with there. That was, again, a recommendation of the leadership team. If you look in that area, like where Shade lives, along East Front, where it kind of swings into Munson, the leadership team wanted that as neighborhood center, because when we looked at some of the maps, we realized the base of the peninsula is really isolated from a lot of commercial uses. You have the residents to the north, then you have the institutional uses, educational services, and then the road. So it's hard to have that access for those residents. It's probably the most challenging area in the city as far as that goes. Any questions on neighborhood center?
I actually have a question. You bring up a really good point. One of the things, I guess, and this would be something we could talk about later, but something we should consider with these is rear vehicle access / parking. A lot of times that leads to the alleys becoming streets, and ownership, who does it fall on to fix that? I know it's usually, special assessment.
Yeah.
So just something to think about going forward, I think, because we have a sandwich shop on the corner there, and they use the alley like a street, and it's tore up pretty bad. But nobody in the neighborhood wants to pay an assessment to fix it.
Yeah, and so that is a challenge that we have. So there's
Yeah.
a piece of legislation called Act 51, and your streets get money. Largely, I think the gas tax gets divided by how many lane miles you have of Act 51. Alleys aren't eligible.
Right.
So we have no funding mechanism to pay for alley improvements besides the special improvement district,
Yeah.
which then costs an additional tax on the taxpayers that live there. The idea is that they would benefit. So a special improvement district, there's a process laid out and how that works, but essentially the property owners get assessed for half the value of the improvements, and the city pays the other half, and then it gets just added to their tax bill over 10 years. And so that's how that gets paid back. It's not the best way to do things, though. And we've had these conversations a lot. I think you raised a really good point. There's a number of reasons why we want parking in the back.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally.
But again, now we're driving traffic back there
Yeah.
where we don't have, it's not built the same as a road to handle all that. So
I just think of my condo, like our parking is back there, and it's literally just a sea of pavement
yeah,
into the people's backyard.
Yeah.
And like, it gets really loud because
hot.
it's hot.
Yeah.
So, just something to consider going forward, I think, with these kinds of things.
I agree. All right. Anything else on neighborhood center? Okay. Commercial core, essentially downtown. So that's pretty straightforward where we're looking at with that. I want to make sure it's known that this is just identifying that built environment. It's not, it aligns in a lot of ways with the DDA boundaries, but it's not explicit to it. It kind of goes more west than what the DDA does currently in this, of course, and it goes a little more east. But it does not, this is not the TIF boundary or anything like that. It's just a land use development pattern boundary. So this would be our most intensely developed commercial district of the three that we have on here. Speaks a lot to what we covered already in a lot of the previous chapters. A lot more numbers on this diagram because there's a lot more going on in that built environment than probably anywhere else, and a lot of needs that need to be balanced in a finite space. Questions on this one?
Page 19. Somewhere on here, there is the sentence, future development in the commercial core should go up and in. I think that we know what that means because we're planners, but I think that in is kind of blah, like Brian was saying about the B. I think it could be up and together, up and something. There's like a different word that is less clunky than in that I think should go there. Or define up and in.
Where?
I can't find
Because
it.
we're starting on page 26.
Yeah.
You mean page 29?
Yeah, I thought I
okay.
said 29,
No,
sorry.
it's
Oh,
good.
you said
It's
19.
29 in the economic development section,
Yep.
Okay.
and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines
Oh, right
down.
here.
Like I know exactly what that means, but if a member of the community is just going to look at our master plan, that could be confusing to them.
I don't. I know what up means. What does in mean?
Like a setback.
Well,
think
and
it
we were
need-
talking more
yeah.
infill.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
see?
Like
Oh,
if you
well.
only have the first third of your property developed and the rest is parking or
Yeah.
other use, then
Thank you.
and that
You're
goes
welcome.
back
Yeah,
to that,
that's a really good point.
that previous comment that we don't have many vacant lots in the city, so you don't have greenfield development. It's infill and building up is largely how you.
Well, it does refer to step.
we do have some vacant lots, but we have no lots that were never built in the first place.
Yes, that is correct.
So it should be up and infill.
Yeah. So maybe we need to reword that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
up
that's-
and
that's very-
infill. So sounds a little strange.
It's very awkward.
Infill and up sounds.
Got one for you, page 28,
Yeah.
land use. Third line, retail, entertainment, other commercial, office, recreation. I want a comma there.
We probably do want to comment.
No, office recreation is a great land use.
Good for you.
We need more office recreation.
Sorry. Overall, I think it's great, but
Nope.
editing is like one of my things, so
Glad you're catching that.
maybe it's OCD, I don't know.
No,
We'll see.
same.
No.
We'll
This
see.
is just that, this is the section of the table that like is nitpicking and editing the whole thing.
Why we're here. All right. If there's nothing else.
Oh, quick question.
Yep.
So this is the new map, the one you handed out, so like the commercial core, so it's not in this now?
No, it'll reflect what you see on
Yeah, it'll
here.
be updated later.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at that leadership team, we're like, well, Old Town is part of the DDA. It's considered part of downtown, so let's extend that. Yep.
Yeah, we also call for it to be up zoned to C4A, which
Correct.
is downtown.
Yep. Yep. All right, so then we move into our residential type land uses. So we have our traditional neighborhoods. So these also correspond. I don't know if you two were around, three were around when they did the street design manual. So we had like the traditional residential streets. I think it went through, I have a couple different copies with different names. I think we landed on maybe formal and informal for the final ones. I think
Yes,
you might have been the one that
I
had
didn't
the
like contemporary, I
Yeah.
didn't like
contemporary and
suburban.
traditional is
Yeah.
what it was. Yes.
Yes.
So I think it went to formal and informal. So this is kind of reflecting the same as that, which is reflection of the built environment. So our traditional neighborhoods are the ones that have your more traditional grid streets, alleys, tree lawns, sidewalks, things like that, as opposed to the contemporary neighborhood, which I hope it's fine that we borrow these terms on here.
I would call it mid-century rather than contemporary.
Yes.
Move
Mid-century
beyond that.
modern.
It's the MCM district. So these are, as you can see, the parts of the city that were residential in nature, but platted and developed later on. And so they took on a different development pattern, mostly at the base of the peninsula. And some of that is dealing with topography. So you have these curvilinear streets as opposed to straight grid network, so that they could fit in with the landscape. But you don't really have alleys over there, so they function a little different. They have larger lots, bigger setbacks from the front and side, and things of that nature. So we were just differentiating between these two. But really, the dimensional standards are what are the difference. There really is no other difference with the use of it, but just rather the dimensions. But since they do have different development patterns, and they're currently zoned differently as R1A and R1B, for a lot of it, we separated them here as well. So, any questions on traditional neighborhood? Okay, for that matter.
Question.
Yeah.
The space along Peninsula Drive between Garfield and Front, you think that should be suburban?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The little waterfront area between Bryant Park and on the Front Street,
Mm-hmm.
we're calling that suburban?
Where?
Contemporary?
You're calling it contemporary, which is
Just to the left
suburban,
of Peninsula.
suburban-like. So along the waterfront, along Peninsula Drive,
Yes.
from Bryant Park
Bryant Park.
They
west.
are significantly larger lots than you have in
They're
other parts
larger
of the city.
lots, true. Okay, and I'm not disagreeing that they're larger lots. The only other reason, but the streets aren't curvilinear. They're budding,
Doesn't have sidewalks.
commercial uses on the other side. There are two main corridors. I don't know if you really want to, if those should be considered. Look, I'm not a big fan of the whole contemporary delineation anyways. At least this is better than the previous one, which was written sort of as an excuse not to put any type of pedestrian amenities in it. So I appreciate that this doesn't go that far. But I think I'm just like looking at that little space there, and I wonder about, the areas that border. I mean, we're using the streets as driveways. And just because they don't have alleys, I don't have an alley, on my street. So should we add my street into suburban? Some of the lots vary in size. But I don't know how those lots actually fit just because they're currently set up as larger lots. Doesn't mean they're not a group of 50-foot lots. I don't know. I'm just raising the question.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's also that little bit of, there's that public access to the beach in there, that
Right.
tiny
George
strip.
Street?
I just don't know what else I would call it. Like, because if you look at traditional, not really, transitional, maybe?
Well, I mean, that whole area has, that whole stretch along Peninsula Drive is, till you get to the gas station, is pretty much just residential.
Yeah.
And isn't it traditional residential? I mean, on the north side, they have alley. Part of it does. So it's just kind of that little area, sort of a weird designation. If somebody said they wanted to split their lots here, would we care?
No, not the zoning would allow. So Brian, and forgive me, I apologize. Are we talking about that little triangle piece that's north of the alley, south of Peninsula Drive, west?
I'm talking about, both of them. Yeah. Both those and the ones on both sides of Peninsula Drive.
Okay.
Just a little stretch from Bryant Park and Garfield east, or west. So all the way to Front Street.
Okay.
I mean, it's just sort of, they're not going to have alleys because they're on the water. So that's why I bring it up. And because of basically my dislike of the suburban term.
It's
For the
contemporary.
entire
Contemporary, we
contemporary,
don't have
I'm covering
suburban.
both in this one.
I did
Yeah.
have a note
Easier
to
to
explain
interchangeable.
why you came up with contemporary, so that was one
Well,
of my
again,
notes.
and we had numerous meetings about these terms.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Specifically contemporary and the next one transitional.
Yeah.
So I'll save that discussion for a little bit, but open to suggestions.
Right.
If you have something besides contemporary. But again, there's time for this change.
I'll bring it back to traditional neighborhood. Funneling bike traffic to specific streets, I feel like funneling just feels so final. I get what you're saying, having it best reserved for major crossing streets in the traditional neighborhood, funneling bike traffic to specific streets. But I feel like technically Washington is Tart through town.
For now, yep.
Yeah, I use State Street. I use, I go all over the place. So I get what you're trying to say here. It just funneling just seems like this is where you can go. That's it. Throughout,
Yeah.
to get east and west, north and south. Is it maybe giving bike traffic a place to be, something like that? I don't know.
Is this under transportation
Transportation and
and
mobility,
mobility?
yeah.
Last sentence.
Yeah, I think what it's trying to reinforce there comes from the mobility plan that in these neighborhoods, not every street is going to have bike infrastructure.
Right.
We're going to have it on the major ones. And I think what we're trying to say is we try to keep our neighborhood streets safe enough that
Yeah.
you can ride on them to get to those. So maybe funneling, it creates almost like a hierarchy.
Okay.
Okay, you're not, well, not
Yeah.
maybe unintentionally. You know,
Yeah.
we're not trying to say you can't ride in the neighborhood streets,
Right.
but we want to have the neighborhood streets give you access to that infrastructure. So we'll
I don't. I
do
don't
our
like that
wordsmithing.
word, but
Directing bike traffic.
Yeah, directing, maybe that's a better, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I get what you're saying. Like, I'm confident I ride everywhere. My mom, not so much.
Yeah.
So, you know, but giving her a place to be where she knows she's safe.
Yep. And maybe we talk more there about keeping the traffic calm on those neighborhood streets so that you can safely utilize them
Yeah.
to get access to the network.
So, did you change contemporary neighborhood? Was it originally called suburban neighborhood?
No, I think that was made up on the spot.
Oh.
No,
Or is it
it's
in here?
it's referred here
It
as
is
suburban.
referred in the
Okay.
paragraph, suburban development pattern,
Yes. I see what you're saying. now. Okay, I was
and
getting
more
somewhere.
suburban neighborhoods. So should it be called the suburban neighborhood?
I
Not
like
really.
that
No,
less.
I don't-
No,
I wouldn't go that
that's
far.
worse.
That's worse.
Yeah.
It is worse because we don't have like a huge.
I mean, I
suburbs
understand
here.
what you're calling them that, you know, and I understand, I don't know if that really matters. But, you know, I just think that, more can be done for some of those neighborhoods, especially in, mobility. So, and that's the biggest issue for them.
Yeah.
And,
Which wouldn't necessarily look like it does in our traditional neighborhoods with a sidewalk on both sides of each gridded street. But you do need to have better access for people to get from point A to point B.
Yep.
we don't really say that. I mean, this is our future land use framework. And we really kind of describe what is existing, not really what we're hoping that will look like in the future. So I don't know, maybe that's just a standard approach. I have an answer for that. So,
In present America, I mean, this is like suburban is a contemporary concept. And like, if you look at the definition of contemporary, belonging to or occurring in the present. Presently in America, it's suburban. So I think contemporary neighborhood, it works for me.
Okay. Well, we'll stick with it for now. We'll be open to other suggestions as time goes on. So
I think it did used to have a different name, and we changed it to contemporary, but I don't remember what it started with.
yeah,
I think
have
the
to-
I mean, we
old
go
one
through,
was-
we keep wordsmithing them, so open to suggestions.
I don't have a suggestion. It's a minor issue. I'm just saying.
thesaurus.
I don't know.
I was just stating I didn't like it. I've never liked it. I'm not saying I have something better. You know,
so you're
just
saying you could live with it.
I can live with it, yes.
Yeah, I think of
Let me be
contemporary is
clear,
very
I can
modern
live with
houses.
Right.
I mean, for anything in there, I just like more, and I'm not saying, we're not talking about necessarily sidewalk, but there are in these contemporary neighborhoods, some large collector streets, state highway, and that's kind of addressing mobility. But those are areas I think need greater mobility, non-motorized mobility. Because when you say this, when I read suburban, it's what I'm reading is, these are the car-centric neighborhoods. These are all focused on the cars, and I understand that, and that's not what you're saying, but it's kind of what we're
But
saying.
that's how we feel about suburbia.
I know, and that I'm just saying that they need, they need more of a, we talk about, it's safer because there's not a lot of traffic on these streets to walk, but every neighborhood has its, its collectors, whether they're, or cut-through streets. Every neighborhood has those, that even though they may be curvilinear, they just collect more traffic, and they get busier. So, can't share every street. Cut-through streets for cars, usually cut-through streets for bicyclists and other, people walking, etc. So,
Yeah, and we do get comments and concerns from like the base of the peninsula residents. I'm really bad with some of the road names up there, but where you have Orchard Heights, there's that north-south road, maybe it's Sheridan that connects with M37 just
Yeah.
north there. So, people are getting cut through to avoid some of that congestion and stuff like that.
Oh, especially now, yeah, it's horrible right now.
I can imagine.
With the speed bumps there.
Yeah, I know like in my neighborhood, it's 16th Street because you get people coming up from Cass from South Airport. 16th is the first street that cuts over to Veterans and allows you to miss the lights at Union and Cass and stuff. And so, yeah, you just see people cut through all the time. So.
So, yeah.
All right, so we touched on traditional and contemporary. The next one is transitional. And the word transitional has really bothered me because we're talking about residential uses and it conveys transitional housing, which has a different purpose and meaning. But really, it's a residential land use that's supposed to be a transition from higher intensity uses to lower intensity residential. And so you'll find most of these are along the corridors, bordering largely the traditional, or in some cases, contemporary neighborhoods with the commercial districts. Now, when we talk about what this might look like in action, I don't think a blanket approach for all these transitional designated areas is going to make sense. And that's where the Planning Commission and staff will have to work together to think about what's most context appropriate. So for instance, if you look along the east side of Division Street, that was included in there. You're right along the highway. Maybe there can be a higher residential intensity right there. But that doesn't mean that that area would be appropriate to incorporate commercial into that higher intensity transitional. Just because of the context of the state highway not having curb cuts, then you'd be forcing commercial traffic into the alleys, which Shay was mentioning. However, when you look at traditional neighborhood or transitional neighborhood along 8th Street there, east of Barlow, there may be an opportunity for some commercial. There is some commercial mixed in that section right now, but it's low intensity commercial that doesn't disrupt the residential uses. So you have professional offices and things like that in that area. So that's where we'll have to have a lot of those conversations. We might want to look at each of these transitional areas one by one and think of, okay, what could that mean? The other thing to keep in mind, and it came up at the leadership team, and I'm not sure if it got reflected in here or not because I haven't reread through it, is that in addition to changing our zoning map, we may want to take a swipe at restructuring our zoning ordinance. We might want to, a big trend in planning right now is collapsing zoning districts. You might have 30 in a town. Well, why not get down to 10? And you like all our D districts. We could probably make that one district, and maybe apply it in other areas. It came up really as redevelopment in areas that needed it, like the Red Mill,
8th Street.
Depot, 8th Street along where the Iron Foundry was, the Ironworks. But now that those are developed, and maybe we think about that looking different moving forward. So, yeah, that's a transitional, and that was also taken from comments that we've heard over the years as we were working through housing. We had like Homestretch here and stuff, and that was one thing that their executive director has mentioned a lot. It's nice to have a higher density residential allowed between the commercial and the single family, just to allow that transition and provide housing that isn't, right now, we push a lot of it into the commercial districts because that's where allowed without a lot of density restrictions like that, more flexibility. But a lot of those people would like to be part of a neighborhood and the amenities and the opportunity that come with it. So there are plenty of discussions. Any questions on transitional?
Along Division Street on the east side, how deep is that transitional zone?
I want to say it's approximately like a parcel or two. It doesn't go real deep. It's intended more for the properties fronting on Division. But I will go back and say again, these boundaries aren't cast in stone. It's what you decide to do with zoning that casts it in
And they
stone.
purposely do not conform to our lot lines or parcel
Right.
boundaries.
No.
Right,
Sometimes-
I understand that. My
yeah.
question is, I'm looking at that and I say, okay, so we're gonna call this transitional, transitional zone.
Mhm.
If you talk about rezoning that for something else, for a higher use, and someone wants to come in and put a multifamily home, they have to go 4 lots, they want to go through 2 or 3 lots deep. And then someone then somebody says, well, the future land use map calls this a transitional neighborhood. You're moving out of that, why are you rezoning it? And my question is, you want to, if you're looking at that as really as kind of creating a transitional buffer along there, then is it deep enough? What's deep enough? Not necessarily a lot line, but how many feet? Is 100 feet deep enough? Is 150 feet deep enough? If you wanted some type of, like multifamily or commercial use along there. And I'm not even advocating for that. I'm just asking that kind of question going forward, because some of these, I'm just trying to wonder, when you put these lines in there, and I've seen people start, raising the question of rezoning, and does it meet the future land use map? And then you get, somebody sues you or whatever, you end up in court, I don't know. But I'm questioning, is it wide enough to create a transitional zone? Or are we just talking about a duplex or a triplex? I guess the question is future land use map. What do we want that area to look like if it transitions?
Yeah.
As a specific case, in the alley between 6th and 5th Street on Division, there is currently what I guess was built as a garage carriage house at one point, so a secondary residential unit behind the primary house, and that garage unit is a triplex. So there is some existing higher intensity residential development.
So,
But I'm questioning and I understand for a triplex, my question is, do we want apartments there?
so when we were thinking this through, it was intentionally left shallow. There is depth to each of those lots north to south. They're about 165 feet deep. But our concern was if we made it too wide east to west, that could facilitate potentially, depending what the rules and the zoning gets changed to, multifamily that may be out of scale with the rest of the character of the neighborhood. So we were trying to keep it small so that we're not talking necessarily true multifamily, but maybe that triplex, quadplex level of intensity. But we'd want it to be somewhat harmonious with the rest of the neighborhood to the east.
There is that little apartment complex about a block in.
On 9th Street?
Nope. Between like 2nd and 3rd, there's that little one level or maybe
yeah,
two
with the
floor.
creek behind it.
Yeah, so
Willow
like I'm
Creek
thinking like
condominiums.
that
Yeah.
that kind of thing, right? Is what you're picturing? I mean, not
Potentially.
like that style
Right.
because it's
I
old.
was just saying, you could run a
Beautiful.
lawn of, 2 or 3 story.
A couple of them.
Yeah.
Apartment buildings along there.
Mhm.
They don't have to be massive. But if you're talking about that type of multiple family housing, it tends to, it isn't be constructed. It tends to fit there better than, some of the single family homes that are building huge brick walls because of the noise and the sound
Mm-hmm.
from the highway.
Yeah, for sure.
So, it's a tough call. People won't like it.
Mhm.
The neighbors won't like it. The people who live there, they don't want to sell. They don't have to, but they can. So they probably don't care. But that's just, it's just one area.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I'm not a big opponent of apartment buildings. So as long as the scale is appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's just me. That's just the way I grew up. I grew up in cities with apartment buildings on the ends of the streets.
Mhm.
Seemed normal to me.
Yeah.
But, I have an apartment building behind me. Doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
It's only 2 stories tall, too.
Yeah, I think we were thinking more of legalizing along that strip some of the non-conforming multifamily that we have in the district. So when I mentioned 9th Street, I don't know, but if you're familiar, but on the north side of 9th Street between Division and Maple, there's, I think, a 4-unit building. It used to be red. It's quite beautiful. It just got resided blue. You know, something of that scale that doesn't stick out like a beacon in the neighborhood, but does permit legally that higher density residential in there. And these are great conversations, but I think these are some of the details that we'll have to figure out moving forward as we have these conversations.
My original point was, I can't tell from this map how deep this is. Is it shell? Is it 150? Is it 300? Is it 50 feet? I can't tell. I'm probably closer to 150 is probably where you're
Yeah,
at.
and we
And
can
that's more than adequate.
we can get a measurement on it with GIS and come back with a number, because right now I would just be
Yeah,
guessing.
so that's all.
And our scales in miles and not.
You know, and
feet,
it's
so.
not just that location. I was just picking on that one.
Yep.
But you have that in a few areas where it's kind of a narrower
Mhm,
band, so.
correct.
Could you tell us a little about the transitional zone that looks like it runs along Bay Street there? Basically between Division and 72?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's an area where it's currently zoned residential, but we have commercial buildings. So as a
Stock brokerage.
what's that?
Baird.
Stock brokerage, Baird is there, yeah.
Baird.
Parks.
There used to be a dentist there.
That window thing.
Yep, Trend Windows. I think the
It's an area that has seen commercial use since before Grandview Parkway was built there.
exactly. And so when we're looking at, okay, how do we allow commercial properties potentially to serve the neighborhood? When we look at that area, that seemed to be the most appropriate is along that Bay Street, since we already have those commercial properties. But right now, they're challenging properties because they're zoned residential. So we'll take the dentist, for example, that used to be there. I think that's at the end of Spruce Street. And so that recently sold. And now they're trying to figure out what to do with it. It has, I think, 2 apartments in it and the dentist office. They want to turn the dentist office into another apartment. You would probably never know the difference. The dentist office probably was a higher intensity use than an apartment would be in it. But now they have to go to the BZA. And so we want to try to streamline this process and more legalize some of those uses there. It's probably not the most ideal location for like single family homes anyways. You know, we've heard plenty about the sound of the highway from that neighborhood. So, you know, maybe allowing that to be legally a window store or a coffee shop may be a better use in that area. And to Mitch's point, that's true. I mean, there was a time where there was no parkway. You know, this was all part of the city and stuff, and this was just commercial frontage along a road at that time. So
There was commercial on both sides of Bay Street.
there was, yeah, there was a marina across the street and everything, and yep, there's some really fascinating old maps to see what the city aerials of what the city looked like before the parkway went in.
Yeah,
It's kind of
and
cool to
then
look at.
MDOT came in and bulldozed about 20 properties.
Yep. Any other questions on transitional? Right. We'll continue our downward intensity of uses now. The next one is basically our industrial district. We referred to it as innovation, production, and technology. Industry is a lot cleaner now than what it used to be a long time ago. We've had these conversations at the Planning Commission. The most recent one would have been Cambia Analytic. So they're a testing facility. They test the cannabis, they test hops from My Local Hops, things like that. But they're more of a science lab than like what we think of industrial, you know. So the city commission, on recommendation of the Planning Commission, allowed them now in districts where before they were only limited to industrial. But we wanted to identify these areas, recognize their importance to the city. We really aren't proposing to expand that land use from really what we have today. In the Aero Park Industrial Park over there on the north side of the airport, it's probably the most beautiful industrial park I've been in a while. It's very wooded and stuff, but there's a lot of available land within the established districts for those uses. Even along Hastings Street, And in case you were ever interested, this part of the city down here, have you ever wondered? What that
Yeah,
is?
I was
what
just
is-
staring at
That's a
that.
425
That's a
annex.
425 agreement. So a 425 agreement is basically that portion of Garfield Township is now officially part of the city. And there was a contract negotiated where we get a percent of the property taxes, Garfield gets a percent. I had talked to my predecessor about it in the past, and what he had said is that some leaders in the city felt we needed more industrial land. So that's why they did this 425 agreement, but it has an end date. I think it's in the 2040s, sometime in there. So this will revert back to Garfield Township
Well,
at one.
It can get renewed at that point.
It could,
And
yes.
I've only heard of one instance of a 425 not getting renewed when the time limit came up. That was the case in Lansing, where it was for an industrial development that never actually happened. So
Yeah. So it is kind of a weird tool that allows a temporary annexation, essentially. We're a state that has really strict annexation laws. We can't really annex. It's very difficult to do that. But that's one legal means to do it, but both parties agree in that
and
case.
it allows those industrial people to be on city water and electrical rates rather than Garfield Township rates.
Yep, correct. That area does have a conservation easement on it. I don't know if you can see that little blue part on the west end of it. There's a big wetland through there. So if you ever look at the aerial of how it's platted and where the development is, there is the conservation easement. And so we have a relationship with the Land Conservancy. They monitor that for us. Usually one person on our staff meets them once a year and goes and walks the property and makes sure that all the terms of the conservation easement are being met. That's that.
I do have two notes for this section.
Please.
Page 43,
Yep.
at the end of the housing and neighborhood section,
Mm-hmm.
including but not limited to, the two should have a colon and not a comma. Are you finding it yet? It's in parentheses. Okay, great. And then the other one was page 45. Let me go find it. Somewhere in here, I say that there is a missing space between Traverse City and which. But I did not denote the section, so it's a little.
right here. I just found it.
economic
found that?
development.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
It's like the Where's Waldo of.
Yeah, it was.
land
Sorry.
searches.
Economic development.
Good for you.
That was it.
A proofreader.
I know.
I missed my calling. That's for sure.
All right. So then we get into institutional. So these are largely where we have our campus plans. So that would include Munson and NMC. We also included the Civic Center. It is a park. It's not one of our parks, so that's why we didn't have it in here listed as the Recreation Conservation District. But again, really no change there. The airport, as you guys, I think, are aware, they became their own independent authority. So they have their own zoning now. It's a very unique, Jackie was there, in fact, at the last
I was
meeting.
there.
Yeah.
It was,
it's
it
you-
was odd.
It functions very differently. So the Airport Authority Zoning Board includes myself, the planning directors from East Bay and Garfield Township as well. And so we have a certain way that we're used to dealing with zoning, and it's very different out there because here we're zoning largely private property to set the rules for development of that private property. Well, at the airport, they own all the property. So the real teeth isn't in the zoning ordinance, but in the lease agreement that they create with Costco and now
Whomever,
this.
with- okay.
Yeah, so, and there's no limit to what they can ask for in that. You know, it's not like, well, you met all the zoning standards, we can approve it. Well, their authority board can go through and say, well, as a condition of this lease, we want this, this, and this, and this met. So although they are not
So they
subject,
can request free Costco membership for all board members.
we'll see where I can get with that.
Do whatever they like and
They, yeah, I forgot what I was going to say about that. But, they're not subject to the city zoning ordinance, but things like our stormwater ordinance, they still have to meet all that. Utilities, all those standards still apply, just not the land use of it.
But they were previously.
Before they became the independent authority, which I think was October of '21, when that was finalized.
Yeah,
So,
somewhere 2021,
yeah, I think I was here when it happened
So they got to turn up their lights.
at Costco. Haven't been out there to find out. They did contact us about, I think they had mulch in all their tree islands and they wanted to switch to stone because it's less maintenance, you know. We're like, well, take it up with the airport authority. We don't have jurisdiction anymore. And there was one point where Dave,
They do have stone.
they have switched it to stone. Yeah. Dave Weston had an airport hangar, a land use permit. And like 2 days later, it went into effect. So he's like, all right, airport, you can approve it. It's no longer ours. So they handle a lot of that. And so what Jackie was there, like the approval of the first special land use permit at a conceptual level for the logistics.
Warehousing and
yeah,
logistics.
logistics and
facility
distribution.
East of Costco.
Yeah, yep, along
Right,
Judson
snugged up
Street.
against the residential area there.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Largely this area that you see kind of in pink there, southeast corner.
That's not, I'm sorry. So that is now, the area east is not also airport property?
I think it is, and I'm going to verify that because I was looking at this
think it
before
is,
the
too.
meeting because that's where we had the meeting last week to discuss this. So,
That pink square.
yeah.
I'd
and-
say the two pink squares.
no, that
That's owned
one,
by the airport.
the one on the west side along Garfield's not part of airport property.
Isn't that where Sarah?
That's where Sarah is. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not in the airport. But that one I believe is. So we'll need to make that change.
Sometimes they rent some airport land, so they're partially not on the airport, but partially on the airport.
Mm,
So they've got leases with the airport for some of the property.
got it.
I have one. Under arts, culture, and recreation, it's NMC's campus includes the Denos Museum Center. I would be remiss if I didn't say that.
Have to do some explaining, huh?
My wife works there.
Yeah. That's in the fourth line.
Yeah.
It's got to say center.
Yes.
That's the official name.
Because they're not.
Did also get that email from them.
Yeah, that was for
Yeah, we did.
the master plan. The
Arts and culture
the
chapter.
whole-
Yeah.
Do we
It's
need,
they're not just a museum. They have the concerts and performances and
Got
stuff like.
it.
So that's why they
Change the name.
they
Or-
want it to be center.
Yep.
Because we're more than a museum.
Jackie, did you have some?
I just wondered if there's a terminology or a naming issue. Is it Historic Barns Park?
Mhm.
Is it, so we're just referring to the historic barns in that same paragraph? No,
I think it's just barns.
Good point.
Well, I have a meeting this week with Matt Cowell of the Rec Authority, so I'll get clarification on that.
Oh, he's at Rarebird right now for trivia.
I can run down and ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Brian.
You're almost done.
Can you grab some of those 32-ounce cans they have in the cooler by the door, too? Bring it back.
You'll probably all be gone by the time I get back.
No, you got some planning director that keeps talking too much, so. All right, next one's public, quasi-public. We kind of hit on that when we talked about the map changes. These are largely the government operations. So really not a lot of change to what's existing there.
Are these the built? These are like what you would consider the built-out areas.
Of like city-owned property.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not inclusive. There's other properties that the city owns
Yeah.
that aren't necessarily being used for any particular purpose for government operations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That's why we want to include the Woodmere properties
Right.
on here and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, question
Is
for
it perhaps too granular to be including other schools besides just Eastern's, NMC, and Central, since they're all in one area, as either institutional or some other category?
That's a good question.
Just thinking that Traverse Heights, Central Grade, and Willow Hill all occupy more or less one city block.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've gone back and forth with
Yeah.
adding schools in and out of different districts at various times.
And I think that property north of Eastern is NMC's property.
Yes.
That is NMC.
Yeah, that's not Eastern Elementary, the school.
No, but to his point,
Yeah.
east of the water, west of the water plant is where Eastern is, and it's categorized as institutional.
Yeah.
I feel like that one in the high school, I feel comfortable leaving as institutional because it's part of this whole like education complex right there.
It's a
The
much
other
larger
ones are in a city, or they're in different zoning districts, but they're allowed, you know,
Yeah.
in those zoning
Yeah.
districts. I feel like TCAPS is going through a bit of a facilities vision,
Yeah.
if you will, not a formal process, but I would be nervous on the future land use map to maybe
Yeah.
change those schools to something else, because if they offload a school,
Yeah.
you know, how would we want that to be developed? If we just leave it on the future land use map as a school, and I get that that's inconsistent with how we're applying it to Eastern and Central High School.
But is it strange in all these segments, you have, you know, land use, sustainability, arts and culture, you have nothing that says education, like a category. So should that be added?
Well, those titles kind of align with the
Our
chapters in the
chapters.
master plan,
Yeah,
and we don't really
have
have
an education.
the
yeah.
educational because we're not charged with that component.
Okay.
And that's what makes schools, with the exception of private schools, but we don't have jurisdiction over school and zoning and land use. So, you know, that was I know a frustration from Garfield Township when they moved the Montessori to Frankie. If they had gone through the normal review period, they would have asked for a crosswalk in front of it as a condition of approval. But the state superintendent of schools approves all school plans and gets the final say and stuff. So we don't get the opportunities on that, which has raised a lot of questions with what they may or may not plan to do with Central grade school. So that will be determined. All right, so that's our quasi-public. And then lastly, we have our recreation, conservation. This is largely pretty straightforward. It's our park system, stuff of that nature, and the golf course.
Is it worth mentioning in here riparian buffers? Because it's not at all.
Well, I would say that fits under the action plan more than a future land use.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can,
just describing what a riparian buffer is, maybe.
you know, I think
Because
under...
it is, the only page it's mentioned is in the action plan.
So I think under, in this chapter, sustainability, resiliency,
That's where I
and
had
natural
noted it.
systems, we can add some language where we talk about many of these are city-owned waterfront properties
Yeah.
and stuff
So-
like that.
Oh, well, I guess riparian, so it does say riparian environments, yeah. I'm fine with that then. Oh, I missed that.
I will check that off as being complete.
Yeah,
exactly.
that's what I'm doing right now with my squiggly lines over the word riparian. I can get rid of that. Okay, so just a quick note on that, so people do understand. Because Riparian Buffer Committee is meeting, they have their second meeting tomorrow. Part of that discussion is, would these regulations best fit in the zoning ordinance or as a police power ordinance? And so we're working with the city attorney and trying to figure out some of those regulations. Municipalities are not subject to their own zoning, so that's something to kind of consider. And part of that is, a lot of times when they're developing their own property, it's for the public good rather than a private property user. So that may come up as a question from time to time. All right. So then we get into the next section, which is the zoning plan. So zoning plan is a requirement of the Planning Enabling Act, which was a change in 2008. So they worked from 2005 to 2009 on our last master plan, and towards the end of the process, they adopted a new Planning Enabling Act that required a zoning plan. So they had to try to pivot. That's why we have that zoning element in the back of our current master plan. It needs to talk about how, in order to implement this future land use plan, some specific types of zoning changes that may need to occur. So I think this is getting back to the topic that you had brought up. So in working with Sarah's team on this, I sent over some screenshots, and they're in here as draft now. So I think this is what you were getting at, Jackie, where we show what the future land use map is calling for, what we have currently as zoning, and then specifically what some of that future zoning in those areas would need to be to go from where we are today to what the future land use map calls from. So we have a number of pages here, and we realize this is our first stab at it, so it's not super clean. So we're gonna have cleaner images that aren't pixelated and stuff like that from the map. But we were just kind of putting this together because this was the last change, I think, coming out of the leadership team meeting.
Right.
So this is where we look at some of these categories and then start prescribing what type of changes need to be done. Now with this, keep in mind, not only is it saying it should change to this category, but the details of that zoning classification may change if this body decides so. You know, like, yeah, it should change to a development district, but we should also change our development district to include X, Y, and Z in order to be consistent with what it's calling. So it's not just a map change, but we may want to finesse the text requirements. The most recent example of that is along 8th Street, specifically the north side. So the north side was 8th Street between Boardman and Railroad, was zoned C2 and C1. They rezoned it to D2, which is what was on the south side, but they also changed the requirements. So that's the type of effort that we're going to be working through in the coming year.
Okay. So on page 59, for instance, you have the future land use framework and a note to say insert zoning map. Was that intended to be a side-by-side of current and future? Or
Yeah,
what's missing here, and what will it, how could a community member be able to use this section to be able to understand if their particular neighborhood is going to be affected in some way?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you can either, this has the zoning map to go in here, but it's the zoning map that exists today. So as that changes, it's not updated in the master plan, but an example of, to be able to compare the two. But you're using the larger maps and whatever's in effect at the time. But that, there will also be kind of a table that's involved that says future land use equals, future land use, neighborhood center equals zoning districts, whatever your districts are for that, Or I should do like traditional neighborhood is equals R1A. Contemporary equals R1B.
So you're presuming that a community member would be aware of what their current zoning category is?
Oh, we
and
never
would be
presume
able
that. No, we never presume
Nah,
that.
they're gonna have to call.
Okay.
Yeah,
Find
most
out.
people don't know,
Right.
if we're being honest.
Right.
So how can we make this user-friendly, I guess, is my challenge.
Well, I think it's difficult in text to do it in this way, but I think there's opportunities through the GIS system to be able to tie them together, the zoning and the future land use, but that's online, more of a interactive map formula that it's very difficult to translate into text in a paper document to be able to do it, because you can't overlay them to make them line up. The best we can do is put them on a similar scale, and figure out what it is, but your zoning map is parcel by parcel, and your future land use map is lines. Right, and so, and it's intended to be more general, so that you can have a little bit of, I'm gonna say discretion when you're going through and looking at rezoning properties. Where that exact line is, it's very intentional that there's not an exact line on the future land use.
So I think I'm hearing that really a community member who might want to know how they personally may be impacted by this master plan is going to need technical assistance? I'm exaggerating to make the point, but
No, but you're not wrong, and I mean that's why we're here as public servants
Right.
is to help those people with those questions. And it's not just land use that people have those questions. It's voting, and like we're here to help explain it to them. I think one thing that would help here is we have insert zoning plan description and insert the description of the general zoning changes. Maybe we put that one page. Maybe it might be helpful to have existing zoning at time of adoption and future land use map on side-by-side pages so that you could cross-reference them visually on the same one, which is what I think they were trying to do here. But I think if we did it as full-page maps on each page, that'll just be at a scale that more people can understand. Do you think that'll help?
Let's try. I mean,
Okay.
anything that you think would enable our community members to more easily understand this.
Yeah.
And our current zoning map isn't 100% reflective of our current built environment. In some places, the future land use map might be
More
more
accurate.
reflective of, oh, we've got commercial along this corridor that is currently seen as a non-conforming use.
Yeah, so what we have on the subsequent pages, as I said, is just kind of some recommendations of how you change the zoning to get there. Again, it's high level, not parcel by parcel. It's generalized intentionally, and it's used to help guide the planning commission in their decision making. And that's very similar to what we have now in our map. If you ever get a chance to look at the zoning element, we have different future land use categories, and we say, well, this future land use category is best supported by zoning districts R1A, R1B, and R2. And then it does call out some specific locations, like, okay, change those here to this, and so on and so forth. And so, like, when we get a zoning request, a zoning change application, that's the first thing we look at. Is, okay, what does the future land use map say? And then what does the zoning element say? And that's what we put in our report as this is consistent with what the commission, or what the plan calls for, to help you guys in your decision. We try to put those maps in there too and include that language. But again, you do have discretion, and that's intentional how it's supposed to be. So, yep. And I will also state that there is a process to amend a master plan, and many communities do that. They may have a proposal for a particular location, and that is not consistent with the future land use map. So then they go through the required process of amending the plan and getting the public input and the public hearings to say, hey, is this appropriate to change the future land use map to better support this? And it can be yay or nay. It doesn't have to be guaranteed. But I would recommend, if you have something that is not consistent with your future land use map, but may be supported by other city priorities, that don't risk it, go through the plan amendment process. Like, do it the right way so that someone can't say in the future or challenge you by saying, hey, this isn't consistent with your future land use map. That's where you really get hung up, is if it's inconsistent. You could argue consistency a long ways, but it's like, if this is a future land use category for conservation and you're talking about putting in an industrial park, that is not consistent. And there's not much discretion in that. It's pretty black and white. And it's a more expedited process to amend than a full adoption of master plan. So that mandatory 63-day waiting period, I think that is 3 weeks shorter for an amendment. It's only 42 days. You do still have to do plan notification, which is stuff that we handle on our end. So we're required at the beginning of this process, we have to email or mail letters to all the surrounding jurisdictions, the utility companies, let them all know that this is done. Once the city commission opens it up for distribution, we have to email them letters again through that, so all the parties are.
Your corridor maps, any, make me want to figure them out. And it's just the order, it's not very instinctual. And this may be a big pain, but you have the flu category, future land use category up top, then you have the existing zoning, then you have the future zoning beneath it. And in some of these, when they're side by sides, I'm confused. If at Division 1, US 31, well, which is the existing zoning and which is the future zone? Takes a little while to figure it out. Once you figure it out, it's okay, but you're jumping. I guess for clarity, it might be easier if you had future zoning underneath the flu category. And you might actually want to flip the whole thing and put the existing zoning up first on top. In the flu category,
That would be
future
helpful.
zoning and the flu category beneath it.
Mhm.
So,
I think so. Yep.
and I'm just, in some of those things are, it's hard to tell, like existing zoning, C1, C2. I like the new color scheme better. It's clearer than the orange with the dots or the brown with the dots.
That could be part of the confusion.
Yeah,
The
so,
existing zoning is confusing.
yes.
Yeah, and I think, so a lot of these images, again, the images will get cleaned up because these are just like snips that I was taking. And so we'll use actual GIS layers. But I think what might be helpful in there, and I'll have to brainstorm with Sarah on this, is if there's some way to, when I look at this section, we'll stick with the division US 131, right? We're talking specifically about the commercial gateway in pink, but there's other future land use categories in there. So we might need to maybe list what they are, and maybe if we look right to the right where it says west front, west of division, you notice the zoning map has no labels. So that's kind of hard to understand what those black dots with the orange are without a label on it. So I think in GIS we can, because this was taken from a static image, we can get the labeling on there a little better to clean that up. Like I said, kind of first stab at it. But it's one of those things where the Planning Enabling Act requires the zoning plan, but does not provide a lot of direction of what that's supposed to look like. So
Can look however you want it to look.
yeah, every plan will look a little different. So we were just taking an effort at this attempt.
Anything else in that section?
All right, and then, as an appendix to the supplemental portion, we have the community engagement report, but we felt that in this actionable piece that we just have a quick summary of it. So we kind of wrap up with the timeline and how we went through and did our community engagement. I'll have to go back and look again, but if not, we should probably reference that a complete community engagement report is in the appendix so that people know if they want the real
that's a good
details on it,
idea.
that's where you can go back and see all that information. But yeah, then it just kind of breaks down what this 2-year process has looked like. It was heavy on the community engagement in the kickoff phases. Then we went into a quiet phase where we took that information, kind of began putting it into text and formulating the concepts that we heard from the people. Then we went back to them and did some more community feedback. That's where we got into some specific topics, specifically that sustainable tourism workshop. We conducted our neighborhood listening sessions, and then we did our design workshop. And then back in phase 3, our evaluation, that's when we did we returned back to the stakeholders that we had met with 2 other times previously, at the beginning of the process, then during the action plan formation, and then kind of met with them again to make sure that they understood or that we captured what they were saying, and also to kind of explain to them why not all 947 items that were generated from that process made it into the plan. That they still exist out there. It's not that they're not important, but we had to be reasonable in our structure of this. And then, of course, we will have that final box will get updated with the open house information. We'll conduct that hopefully at the end of June, before summer gets too busy for everyone.
I do have a couple notes in here.
Mm-hmm.
Page 65, the project website paragraph section. At the beginning of the project, a website was created. We just have to stick "was" in there.
Okay.
Page 67, down to 67. So are you saying, wait, No, 68. I'm sorry. Nope. Also wrong.
That's
Wait, what is happening here?
Just pages.
I just did not have the greatest notes here, clearly. No, it was page 69.
Okay.
So are you saying you'll flesh out the third phase of community engagement descriptor under phase 3 evaluation once we complete the open house?
Mm-hmm.
So like we won't have the ellipses?
Yes.
Okay, great.
No, we won't
Yeah.
have them.
Yes.
Yes, you are
Yes.
correct. Yes.
Yes, we will flesh
I
out.
think-
I understood
Yes,
both of those.
okay, thank you.
And then in the direct middle of the August 23rd paragraph,
Mhm.
there is a sentence that starts with, "The stakeholders were asked to what degree they support the action items, how involved they would like to be in implementation." I get hung up on it every time. So in creation or remove the "in" because in implementation is just a little clunky.
Yep.
And then open house paragraph. Were also provided instead of was. Oh, an open house, wait, where is that? Oh, small postcards with the link to the master plan and contact information for the project team were also provided so that the community members, blah, 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 instead of was also.
Mhm.
And that's it for me.
Okay.
Good job, Anna.
No double spaces
No,
after
no, no,
periods or
no.
anything.
I didn't see any double
I
didn't
spaces this
see
whole
that.
time. I looked, trust me. I looked for double spaces.
Oh, me too. Just have to call them out. We don't use typewriters anymore.
We don't do double spacing anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know when that happened, but
I don't know, and apparently we
Like
call
15 years
PowerPoint
ago.
slide decks. Things just change.
Isn't the
you know?
comma supposed to be within the parentheses?
Yes.
So that's a problem. Too.
Where's that one?
That's on page 67.
I usually let those slide because
Oh.
those are people's preferences.
Oh.
I always put mine in.
The future of this community's land use hangs in the balance of
Hangs on the commas being
Well,
inside the
it is
quotations.
weird
It
looking.
looks a little weird.
It's
Which
weird-
section are we talking
weird
about?
looking.
In
Open
the
house,
open
house
occupancy
2022.
preserved, enhanced. The comma should be
Yeah.
inside.
Inside the parentheses, yeah.
Yeah.
After enhanced
Yeah.
and preserved.
well,
And preserved.
yeah.
enhanced.
Yeah.
You know, when
Just
I
like
go
other
back to the copy editor's notes, she's gonna have something completely different because I did get her notes back,
Yeah.
so they've not been put in yet.
It made weird spaces there.
Yeah. Beauty of
So I'd like to ask about general content for this section. You've done a very thorough job of describing the process of community engagement. And I find myself really feeling a strong need to know, and what did you discover? At least at a high level, 30,000-foot perspective. It's like a joke without a punchline. It's, where's the beef? What did we learn from all of this community engagement?
Yeah, I
Wouldn't
think the key was the guiding principles
Yeah.
that we established early on that we used throughout the creation of this and our process, but also the community engagement also gave us the opportunity to get feedback as we were crafting of it.
Say that.
No, that's what I'm taking notes.
And,
I wrote
and try to
high-level
be
summary at the
yeah,
top to
as
kind of-
specific as
Yep.
we can.
Yeah.
For those who aren't willing to dive into the appendix. And, I'm hoping within the appendix that we're going to have a fair amount of detail on the feedback that was received. But certainly in this main body, we deserve some sort of a summary of what we learned.
Mm-hmm.
All that community engagement feedback is in the 400-page.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality of it
Yeah,
too,
it
is
is.
the community engagement and feedback is
In
what
some-
created
yeah.
the plan that
But
then
it
was
should
fed
be
through.
summarized and
Yeah.
analyzed to a certain extent so that we understand how you turned that into something actionable.
Yep.
Anything else? Any closing remarks?
Great.
Beautiful.
you.
Really great job. At the
Thank you.
several meetings, but yeah.
I have a
please.
question. There's a lot of really good stuff in here, Sean and Sarah. I'm gonna take it there. We all know that there's a ballot initiative for TIFs. I guess like my question would be like, what does the timeline look like if you can't do some of the things with a TIF? Like, I want to see my portion of 8th Street better than it is. I know that there's ways that we can use tax increment financing to do that. That obviously is going to make the timeline like longer.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's just the reality that we work in every day. You know, we could say, hey, this is the path forward, and then go
Yeah.
with this. So we lay out the best plan and roadmap, and then we address the obstacles as they come. But yeah, you're right. Things like that would delay implementation of some of these items quite a bit.
And like it talks about affordable housing a lot, like brownfields,
Which is a TIF.
Yeah.
Yeah,
which
which
is a
would be
TIF.
impacted.
We can't, and we just I sit on the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority.
Yeah.
We just passed our first one, and it was
Yeah, that's
huge. It was a big deal. Like
by
we learned
Sam's
a lot
Club there.
from the developer, and you
Yeah.
know, he's like, it's great that Michigan's doing this,
Mhm.
and he wants to use it more often.
Mhm.
So, you know, just some things to think about, I think, going
Yep.
forward.
Good point.
I don't really feel like there's any efficient way of putting that in here.
No, and I don't think there's
It's a separate
anything,
issue.
there's
Yeah.
nothing to put in here. I'm just
Just a
saying, like,
question
our
for-
timelines, like 3 to 5 years, it now becomes 10, 20 years or whatever, you know, like, because we have to raise the money to do these things.
Maybe we can put in some sort of note that it's dependent upon the
I don't think.
Funding.
No,
political atmosphere
No.
of funding. I don't know.
just
That's
awareness,
always true.
just
It's
bringing it up as
implied, yeah.
awareness more than anything.
Awful lot of assumptions going on here.
Yeah,
I
and
think
you're
the
right.
annual budget process is probably the place where we're going to find out what can be afforded and what can't.
Well,
Well,
on an
not
annual
entirely.
basis, but not, like, a
Yeah.
lot of these projects require bonding that you then have to,
Correct.
that's where the TIF comes into
Brownfield
pay.
funds.
Yeah, yeah, which is a TIF.
Entirely separate from a budget,
Yeah,
an annual budget.
yeah.
But what he said, it's a plan is a plan, and they
Yeah.
change all the time.
Yeah.
I don't think you should write anything.
No,
about
no.
Political climate.
No, and
Just
I
bringing
took
it
it
up
just
as
as a
awareness.
question
Yeah.
for
Just
discussion.
awareness, yeah.
I didn't take it as a,
Yeah.
incorporate this in there.
Well, I think we should applaud staff, our consultant, all of us, everybody
Yeah, you
involved.
guys
This
have
has
been
been
through a lot.
a 2-year or more process.
So long.
So yay, so
Yeah,
great
it's everyone.
that we're here finally.
Only
So-
we had cake to have after.
And we have cake.
Oh, we
We
did.
do,
Okay.
cake-ish. So, so that takes us to, so can we, we don't have to vote to end this discussion?
No, because we want to, this is a non-voting, no action
Okay.
meeting, so we'll bring this back hopefully next week. That's our plan if we can, I like how I say we, when Sarah, get this, all these changes
Thank
incorporated.
you, Sarah,
on
for
her end.
everything.
Well, he was looking away from you when he
I
said
know,
we.
that's because he didn't really want to see my face when he said it.
Because clearly in the
Oh, no,
consultant
she
world,
said-
we're her only client that she's working
Yeah,
with
right.
right now, and she's just twiddling her thumbs until we give her work to do.
Well, thanks, Sarah. This has been a great meeting, very good comments, and
I mean, I guess a question overall, do you feel confident that this will be a tool that you can use in the future to help guide you?
absolutely. So much
That's the
better
key.
than the current one.
And this is the part that we'll be using the most often. You know, the other part is, we never really did that level of depth of a review of community data and information. And so, it was a fun exercise. We learned a lot. It's a good source of information. Sleep aid, if you're having tired.
I mean, it speaks much better. All of our documentation speak much better to each other this way than the previous version of the master plan, which is TC1, TC5. Like,
Yeah.
we never look at that or reference that in the zoning code and in the future land use maps. So I think it's much more cohesive.
I think I would agree with that.
All right, well, congrats, everyone. Now, on to announcements. Do you have any?
The only one that I have right now is we are having this community event on June 18th at the City Opera House. It is the regularly scheduled Planning Commission study session. So no extra meeting for you all, but it will be a joint meeting of the Planning Commission, the DDA, and the City Commission. A presentation from Ryan Kilpatrick of Housing Next and Flywheel Momentum, along with Leah Dumichelle, who works at the Michigan Association of Planning and used to be my boss and Sarah's boss at Beckett and Rader before she left to go to that association. They provided a presentation at this year's Housing Summit. I did not attend, the city attorney did, and they are working on a broader national effort called the Zoning Atlas, which is got about 100 variables of how you would classify your zoning, so they can have a network map related to housing, or a national map of where can housing be built and what kind of housing can be built. And so they've taken the lead in Michigan, and they've started with Ottawa, Kent, and Muskegon County. So they were speaking to that, and our city attorney felt it was a very good presentation based steeply in data, partnering with the University of Michigan, and would like to bring them here to have a community conversation about housing needs and really bridging the gaps between some of our needs and existing conditions and things like that. And a big part about the zoning atlas that I think will be beneficial once we get something like that established in this area, that's not what the presentation's all about, but is, compared to, say, Southeast Michigan, we are pretty undeveloped up here. But when you look at Grand Traverse County, if you were to take a map of the county and then layer on the land that is state forest that can't be developed, the land that's under conservation easement, the land that is wetlands, steep slopes, tribal land, purchase of development rights, parks, all these things, and then you throw in where there's actual infrastructure to support development, we really don't have that many developmental areas in the county. So they're trying to work on putting that data together so that we can have a clearer picture of all of that, and also show some cost benefit analysis of different development patterns, and realizing that it's going to look different in different parts of the city, in the county, because of infrastructure and development patterns and things like that. It's intended to be, it'll have interactive components utilizing most likely the Mentimeter. So some of the planning commissioners, when we had our joint session, we did that where they pull it up. And so you can voice your opinion and have your opinion show up through the voting that occurs on the screen. And it's a good way to get everyone to participate. You've all been on boards. You may have a loud personality that dominates the whole conversation and no one wants to speak in opposition. It can be aggressive. This way everyone is able to participate the same. And the public can participate as well. So with the Mentimeter, typically what happens, they use this a lot at conferences now, is there'll be a QR code, picture, and then everyone's participating in real time throughout it. And so it's a great way to get real feedback. But they want to walk through scenarios too, that they've done this in other communities, like, okay, who do we need housing for? Teachers, police. Okay, well, this is their median income. All right, what type of housing do you want? Okay, well, this is the median cost to create that type of housing. This group can't afford that. So let's look at some other options and how that might work. But a big part of that is also understanding the cost benefit to the city too, because we have to pay for the infrastructure that ultimately serves that development. So what is that return on certain development patterns for the money that we're having to put in for the water, the sewer, the roads, the emergency services to provide for that, and really try to pull that data together into an informed discussion. So they were here today. They met with all the department heads for our staff meeting. We went and toured the Opera House to talk about the format and how that's going to be laid out. It'll be a public meeting, inviting everyone to the public. We will have 4 8-person tables set up at the front, and that's where the board members will sit. Then we'll have it set up like traditional rows of seating afterwards. We'll save the first few rows because we're also inviting our township planning commissioners and board of trustees, because this is a regional issue and solutions here might not work there and vice versa, but everyone's working on this, and so all want to be part of the same conversation. So they'll be invited as well as the public at large. So we're really going to try to promote this event. It will also be live streamed.
You know what time it is yet?
It'll be at 6 p.m. Yep, so we're anticipating 6 to 8. We'll open up the Opera House at probably 5:30. So June 18th, and yeah, that's what I know today based on our conversation. Like I said, Lauren had the chance to see this, thought it was a great idea. City manager supported it.
Very
so
exciting.
We're moving forward. They're very fun people to listen to as well. They're like energetic, informed, just good people to interact with.
You did say county as well, right?
Yeah, in fact, we had Chris Forsyth come down because that's part of it too, is understanding what programs the county has to help address housing. To Shay's point, the Brownfield TIF, the land bank, the PACE, which is something in clean energy. So it's a really low financing. So when you have a development, you can incorporate green energy technology, which is a goal of the cities, that this can help the developers pay for the added expense of that. It's a very low interest loan, maybe like 1.5%, which is almost a grant at that point when you're talking how much capital costs today. So we're very excited about it. We'll keep you all informed. And yeah, I guess we'll see you guys next week, and hopefully not the 21st of May, because
Yes.
I could use a break at this point.
You're going to be,
Yep, it'll be
Meeting.
me.
well, thank you. I want to take this opportunity to thank Chief Jim Teller here.
Yeah,
Yes.
20 years of service.
Is it 8 years of service? Is that what it is?
Well, I think November, so about 8.5, whatever.
8.5 years of service on this planning commission.
On the planning commission.
Thank you so much for your very calm demeanor and very thoughtful things that you say, and really going to miss you. You've been great. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an honor and a privilege, and everybody should be so fortunate to sit here amongst the stellar group of individuals that contribute so much time and effort into keeping our city safe and good and attractive and a nice place to be.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment? I don't see any. We will adjourn and have cake. Ish.
Okay.
All right.
Now, wait,
Oh,
I know. No, that was
She's
an
like
excited cake.
but
Oh,
I have to say, I contacted Katie today, and she said she was going to pull out plates and
I could get them
napkins
for you. They're in our office.
and forks if you haven't.
We did.
That saved me from stopping again.
You don't always carry a spoon in your pocket?
I don't know.
No, I do not, Mitch. I carry many